Tehran, 1979. The Shah is gone, the American military advisors are packing their bags, and Iran is staring at a military built entirely from borrowed parts it never learned to operate. American jets sitting on runways with no one who understood the engines, tanks with manuals written in English. But there was a hidden kill switch built into every contract, one that wouldn't be flipped until the moment Iran needed those weapons most. And then there was Project Flower, a joint missile program with Israel that Iran had funded with oil. Not cash, oil. Millions of barrels of crude shipped to Israel in exchange for missiles with a range of 150 to 200 kilometers that were never actually delivered. When the revolution hit, picture the scene. Israeli engineers loading crates in a Tehran basement, rolling up blueprints, wiping hard drives, while the transport planes idled on the tarmac. Every technical document, every schematic, every scrap of useful knowledge, gone in an afternoon. Iran got an invoice for $1 billion worth of nothing. They left with the blueprints, but they left behind a nation that realized it had bought a military it didn't actually own. It would take 40 years, but the bill for that afternoon in Tehran was about to become the most expensive invoice in military history. That betrayal didn't just sting, it rewired how an entire country thought about power, money, and what security actually means. To understand why, we have to look at the policeman the Shah had spent billions to create. Before the revolution, Iran was what Western officials openly called the policeman of the Persian Gulf. The Shah spent billions on American jets, tanks, naval fleets, the full package. But the contracts came with a catch. US military advisors were installed specifically to prevent Iranian engineers from understanding the technology they were buying. The weapons worked. The knowledge of how they worked stayed American. So when surface-to-surface missiles became the priority, the US refused. They blocked the Lance missile system at 120 kilometers, then extended the refusal down to rockets with 60-kilometer range. The Shah turned to Israel. The project collapsed before achieving anything, and the engineers left with everything. Then Saddam invaded in 1980. His Soviet Scuds were hitting Iranian cities while Iran's engineers stood next to empty launch pads. The one partner that could have armed them had already taken the money and gone. For almost 2 years, Iran's response to city-killing missile strikes was firing warning flares over Iraqi border towns. Flares. That's what $1 billion in foreign dependency bought them. The lesson that crystallized out of that humiliation is simple, and it is absolute. If it can be sanctioned, embargoed, or withheld, it isn't a weapon, it's a liability. A gun that someone else can unload whenever your interests stop aligning with theirs. That's when Hassan Tehrani Moaddam was handed an almost impossible assignment. In late 1984, he left for Syria with 12 men and a single order. Learn what no country would sell Iran. No hardware budget, no foreign contracts, no superpower willing to pick up the phone. Just 12 artillery officers rotating through shifts, morning and night, each one mastering launch command, assembly, fueling, guidance, every role at once, because there weren't enough of them to specialize. They weren't building a missile program, they were reverse engineering the concept of one from scratch, in a foreign country, on borrowed time, while Saddam's Scuds were still falling on Iranian cities back home. That Damascus trip is where Iran's missile program begins, from absolute zero. And the men who came back from it understood something that no sanctions regime ever accounted for. If you refuse to sell a country its security, you don't leave it defenseless. You leave it with no choice but to build something you can't cut off. 12 men in a Damascus basement. Do you think a modern military could be built from scratch like this today, or was this a one-time historical anomaly? Drop your take in the comments. That doctrine didn't stay theoretical for long. It went underground, literally. In 1984, while the war with Iraq was still grinding, Iran built its first underground missile base near Kermanshah. Crude tunnels, borrowed Scud missiles acquired from Libya, nothing close to what would come later, but it locked in the principle that would drive 40 years of Iranian military construction. Anything you can see from the sky is already a target. Visibility equals vulnerability, and vulnerability in a country surrounded by American bases in every direction equals destruction. When the war ended in 1988, Iran looked at the ceasefire and saw a countdown, not a finish line. The next conflict wasn't a question of if, it was a question of whether Iran would be ready when it arrived. So while Western governments were drafting the next round of sanctions and American planners were updating their target lists, Iran started moving. Everything. The Passive Defense Initiative launched in 1989 wasn't a weapons program, it was a disappearing act. The entire military nervous system of the country began relocating underground before the West could finish designing the cage. The Zagros Mountains in the west, the Alborz Range in the north, the ranges running south toward the Strait of Hormuz. Iran wasn't choosing scenic locations, it was choosing rock, hundreds of meters of it overhead. So what does a missile city actually look like? The tunnels are carved 500 meters into solid rock, not concrete bunkers, solid mountain. Put that number in your head for a second. The Eiffel Tower is 300 meters tall. You could drop it into one of these tunnels and the tip wouldn't break the surface. You aren't looking at a bunker, you're looking at an inverted skyscraper buried inside a mountain, wide enough for two large trucks to pass each other without slowing down, with ceilings high enough for ballistic missiles to stand upright on their mobile launcher vehicles. If that scale sounds impossible to you, hit the like button. It helps us know which stats are hitting hardest. These aren't storage depots, they're self-contained military ecosystems that can operate indefinitely with no connection to anything above ground. In 2020, footage came out showing something no other country has publicly demonstrated: an automated underground rail system, moving 5 medium-range ballistic missiles on a single rail car into a vertical launch position. Fire one, the rail automatically advances the next. Fire that one, the next one moves up. A single underground silo, cycling through missiles like rounds from a magazine. In the West, a silo is a grave for a single missile. But Iran's engineers looked at that design and saw a fatal flaw, so they built something that functions more like a giant underground semi-automatic. The United States, Russia and China each put one missile in one silo. Iran built a magazine. Then, in March 2025, footage showed Iran's Armed Forces Chief of Staff, General Berry, riding through tunnel systems lined wall to wall with launcher vehicles. In a single camera frame, at least 78 missiles were visible. Haj Qassam solid fuel ballistics, Imad liquid fuel systems, Parvir land attack cruise missiles, and the tunnels ran further than the camera could reach. That one frame is a fraction of one facility inside a network that, according to IRGC commanders, would take more than 2 years to fully reveal, even at a rate of one base per week. On paper, the solution is simple: a bigger bomb. But there is a point where even the most powerful weapon on Earth hits a wall of pure physics it cannot break. America's answer was the GBU-57 Massive Ordnance Penetrator, a mountain-crushing giant designed to end any underground war in seconds. Under ideal conditions, it punches through roughly 60 meters of reinforced concrete. Against a target buried nearly half a kilometer deep inside solid rock, that 60-meter punch is mathematically irrelevant. That's not a gap you close with a bigger bomb. It's like trying to break into a bank vault with a toothpick, and no matter how many toothpicks you bring, the vault doesn't care. And scale does the rest of the work. Even if satellites identify a portion of the network, destroying it would require thousands of individual strikes, sustained over weeks, coordinated across every province in a country the size of Western Europe. The logistics collapse before the mission begins. There's one final irony in how this got built. Sanctions cut Iran off from foreign supply chains, so Iran built domestic ones. The engineers who couldn't buy components learned to manufacture them. The pressure designed to prevent this infrastructure directly produced the human capital that constructed it. The physics of the mountain created a strategic stalemate that no bomb could break. But all of that was just math on a chalkboard until the summer of 2025, when the theory was finally put to the ultimate test. June 2025, 12 days of direct conflict. American strikes hit Iranian nuclear infrastructure, Israeli strikes went after surface launches, and by most estimates, 2/3 of Iran's surface ballistic missile launches were destroyed or damaged, along with somewhere between 1/3 and half of its visible arsenal. Iran absorbed it and launched over 500 ballistic missiles in a single week, proving the underground cities had made the West's air superiority mathematically irrelevant. But June 2025 only proved Iran could survive. February 2026 proved something harder to swallow. This time the campaign went further. decapitation strikes against military leadership, severe damage to civilian infrastructure, the kind of sustained pressure that in any conventional model should have broken the response capacity entirely. It didn't. While satellites scanned empty runways and analysts studied surface craters, the real war was already launching from somewhere those cameras couldn't point. Hundreds of missiles and drones rising out of tunnels that don't appear on any target list. American bases across the region took direct hits. Israel's layered air defense, stacked with THAAD, Patriot, Iron Dome and Arrow systems, was saturated and overwhelmed. Gulf state defenses buckled under the volume. June had answered the survival question, February answered the dominance question, and the math of regional deterrence didn't bend, it broke open. Now do the math. On one side, a $12 million interceptor that takes a year to manufacture. On the other, a domestically produced missile built for a fraction of that, inside a decentralized production system spread across every province in the country. A significant portion of the entire US global THAAD stockpile was expended inside 2 weeks. It isn't just about the $12 million price tag on every interceptor. It's about a number that the Pentagon refuses to say out loud, the number of days it takes to replace a single shot. American production lines manufacture a limited number of these per year. Iran builds faster than the West can intercept, and the West burns through irreplaceable inventory stopping it. You cannot win a war of attrition against a production system designed from the beginning to outlast you. A $12 million interceptor versus a fraction of the cost missile built inside a decentralized domestic production system. In a war of attrition, who actually wins? The side with the best technology, or the side that can afford to lose the most? Tell me your new math of war in the comments. What February 2026 confirmed for every government in the region is this: Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and every American forward base within missile range now sits inside a deterrence envelope that no air campaign can dismantle. The strategic geography of the Middle East shifted, and the underground cities are the reason it shifted. The final irony is the one that history makes unavoidable. The sanctions designed to strangle Iran's military capacity forced Iran to build the one kind of military capacity that sanctions, airstrikes, and conventional warfare combined cannot touch. The engineers who walked out of Tehran in '79 thought they were leaving a hollow shell. They were wrong. What they actually left behind was a country with no choice but to build something you can't put on a crate and fly away. 40 years later, that something launched over 500 ballistic missiles in a single week from tunnels no satellite could find and no bomb could reach. Iran didn't survive the sanctions era in spite of the pressure. The pressure is exactly what built it. Project Flower's bill finally came due. Subscribe and drop a comment. Does the bunker buster gap ever actually get closed? And if you want to know about this war's most dangerous weapon, watch this next video.